Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Coming to you from New Zealand today and for the next few weeks. Today is June 4th, the 35th year anniversary of the Tiananmen Square crackdown, also known as the Tiananmen Square massacre. This is an incredibly sensitive time of the year for Beijing, with restrictions touching on many areas, including some seemingly remote. For example, in the lead-up to the anniversary, some platforms and institutions appeared to be removing any opportunity for memorial posts. On its Weibo account on Friday, World of Warcraft said its website would be undergoing maintenance from the 3rd through to the 5th of June, and users would be unable to log in or leave messages. Maya Wang, acting China director of US-based Human Rights Watch, expressed in a note last week, quote, "The Chinese government is seeking to erase memory of the Tiananmen massacre throughout China and in Hong Kong. But 35 years on, the government has been unable to extinguish the flames of remembrance for those risking all to promote respect for democracy and human rights in China." End quote. In the lead-up to today, the Christian Times ran a blank front page expressing it, quote, "can only respond to the current situation by turning paragraphs into blank squares and white space," end quote, adding that society had become restrictive. The Christian Times usually publishes Tiananmen-related content ahead of any anniversary, but this year said its front page could not be printed due to an issue. Many have expressed their own reflections on this anniversary, but there is one from an often-quoted commentator on China Update I'd like to note. Quote, "The security services are still paranoid about and cracking down on any expressions of memory of the events 35 years ago, and now in Hong Kong too. I was a student at Peking University for the 1989 spring semester, and when classes stopped in April, I got a job as a fixer for CBS News, even though my Chinese was poor and I had no clue what was happening. I got to spend a lot of time on Tiananmen Square, and finally left on June 20th. I had a cheap camera, and I kept finding old photos. Tough question, but 35 years later, and as the world and the PRC have changed so much, does 1989 even matter anymore, or is it just a fading memory for fewer and fewer people? And will it eventually be forgotten by all but a few? One of the biggest lessons for 1989 is never underestimate what the party will do when it feels threatened. Sounds obvious, I know, but it seems like a lesson each generation needs to relearn." End quote. Next up, over the weekend we covered the first half of the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum being held in Singapore. We covered the statements made by the US and the Philippines. Today we cover the second half of the event with statements made by the Chinese side, as well as Ukrainian leader Zelensky, who was a surprise guest speaker. PRC Defense Minister Dong Jun made his first visit to the event, and the PRC delegation stuck with the general talking points, namely that China is a force for peace in the region and that all issues are due to the US and their regional collaborators. State media supported this rhetoric, with state-run Global Times publishing a special editorial called "China is a guardian of peace in the Asia-Pacific who matches words with deeds." Regarding Taiwan, Dong Jun said the new President William Lai and his government were, quote, "now using military means to reject unification and making a lot of noise about arming themselves. Facing the strong military of the big mainland, such armed conspiracies will be futile and will only lead to their own destruction more rapidly." End quote. Lieutenant General He Lei, a military scholar who was part of the delegation, also did not shy away from war talk when discussing Taiwan. On Sunday, he told reporters that the recent Chinese military exercises near Taiwan, quote, "was a rehearsal for one of our battle plans." End quote. Dong also angrily rejected a challenge from the audience that actions by the Chinese Coast Guard against Philippine ships in the South China Sea ran counter to the stated peaceful intentions. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, Japanese Minister of Defense Minoru Kihara, and Republic of Korea Minister of Defense Shin Won-sik convened a trilateral meeting on the sidelines of the forum on Sunday to discuss ways to counter the, quote, "dangerous and aggressive behavior of China in support of unlawful maritime claims," end quote, in the South China Sea. Meanwhile, Ukraine President Zelensky also made an appearance at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and for the first time criticized China publicly. On Sunday, during a press conference after delivering an address at the dialogue, Zelensky expressed, quote, "Russia, using Chinese influence on the region, using Chinese diplomats also, does everything to disrupt the peace summit." End quote. As US-based Politico explains, quote, "In a rare public rebuke of China, after years of careful attempts to court Beijing and peel it away from its no-limits friendship with Russia, Zelensky's frustration appeared to boil over in Singapore." End quote. The Ukrainian president added in his comments, quote, "We do not expect military support from China. We have never asked them, but we do not expect China to provide defense support to Russia. That is what we discussed with the Chinese leader by phone. He promised me China would stand aside, would not support Russia with weapons. Today there is intelligence that somehow, some way, some things come to Russia's market via China. Elements of Russia's weaponry come from China." End quote. Soon after the statements, Beijing denied all allegations, with the PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson expressing that, quote, "China's position on the summit on peace in Ukraine is fair and just." End quote. Next up, we explore this theme of Russia-China in a space of increasing frustration to the former, the power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing is the only way in which this channel can grow. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much. Next up, UK-based The Financial Times reports this week, citing unnamed sources, that Russia's attempts to conclude a major gas pipeline deal with China have run aground over what Moscow sees as Beijing's unreasonable demands on price and supply levels. Beijing's tough stance on the power of Siberia 2 pipeline, the outlet argues, underscores how Russia's invasion of Ukraine has left Vladimir Putin increasingly dependent on Chinese leader Xi Jinping for economic support. The people familiar with the matter said China had asked to pay close to Russia's heavily subsidized domestic prices and would only commit to buying a small fraction of the pipeline's planned annual capacity of 50 billion cubic meters of gas. While Russia has insisted it is confident of an agreement on the power of Siberia 2, quote, "in the near future," end quote, two of the people told the outlet that the impasse was the reason why Alexei Miller, Gazprom's chief executive, had not joined Putin on the Russian leader's recent state visit to Beijing last month. The Financial Times adds, quote, "A deal on the pipeline was one of the three main requests Putin made to Xi when they met, according to people familiar with the matter, along with more Chinese bank activity in Russia, and for China to snub a peace conference being organized by Ukraine this month. China announced on Friday it would skip Ukraine's summit in Switzerland. Two of the people said Beijing and Moscow were discussing ring-fencing one or more banks that would finance trade in components for Russia's defense industry, all but certainly incurring US sanctions that would cut any such bank out of the broader global financial system." End quote. China is playing hardball, but it would still like to see a pipeline for strategic reasons. Alexander Gavriv, director of the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center in Berlin, expressed in a note last week, quote, "China could need Russian gas strategically as a secure source of supply, not based on maritime routes that would be affected in case of a maritime conflict around Taiwan or the South China Sea. But to make that worthwhile, China really needs a very cheap price and flexible obligations." End quote. He explains that Russia's lack of an alternative overland route for its gas exports means Gazprom would probably have to accept China's conditions, expressing, quote, "China believes time's on its side. It has room to wait to squeeze the best conditions out of the Russians and wait for attention on the China-Russia relationship to move elsewhere. The pipeline can be built rather quickly since the gas fields are already developed. Ultimately, the Russians don't have any other option to market this gas." End quote. If the Chinese have studied their Russian literature, they would know the words of Tolstoy from War and Peace. A nation's greatest two warriors are patience and time. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.